Let me paint you a picture. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'm standing on my bathroom sink in socks, which, yes, I already know was a terrible idea. Holding a wrench I definitely don't know how to use, and there is water dripping from my ceiling like the apartment itself is crying. Which, honestly, same. It had been exactly 43 days since the end of a 4-year relationship, and I was learning, in real time, that I had absolutely no idea how to exist alone in a space that kept falling apart. Her name was Claire. We don't need to linger there, not yet anyway. But what you need to understand is that for 4 years, Claire handled everything that required a tool, a manual, or any interaction with the building's maintenance line. I handled the cooking, the social calendar, and the emotional labor of keeping us connected. It was a system. An imperfect, ultimately unsustainable system, but a system nonetheless. And when she left, she took the system with her and left me with a wrench I couldn't identify and a pipe that was very much not okay. I had found the leak 3 hours earlier. A small, dark stain blooming on the bathroom ceiling, modest and threatening, like a bad omen in watercolor. I did what any reasonable adult would do. I Googled it. Then I watched 4 YouTube tutorials. Then I went to the hardware store and spent $40 on things the man at the counter assured me I needed, but whose names I've already forgotten. Then I climbed onto the sink. I want to be very clear that at no point during this process did I feel confident. I felt the opposite of confident. I felt like a fraud wearing a tool belt. The wrench slipped. I grabbed the pipe. The pipe disagreed with that decision. What had been a modest drip became, very suddenly, a deeply committed waterfall. I said words I won't repeat here. I grabbed every towel I owned, including the decorative ones Claire always said were not for actual use, which felt like a small petty victory, and threw them on the floor. Then I sat on the edge of the bathtub and had a very quiet breakdown, not the dramatic kind. The kind where you just breathe too carefully and stare at the grout and think, how did I get here? I was mid-stare when someone knocked on my door. Not a polite knock. I have complaints and I'm not afraid to voice them knock. I opened it to find my neighbor Donna, 62, silver braid down her back, wearing a bathrobe that had probably seen better decades, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed and an expression that could strip paint. She told me, with the calm precision of someone who had been planning this speech for at least 10 minutes, that my bathroom was now her bathroom ceiling and that she could hear the water, and that this was unacceptable at nearly midnight on a weeknight. I apologized, profusely. Donna's expression did not soften, but she did step inside, which I hadn't invited her to do, and survey the damage with the air of someone assessing a crime scene. She shook her head twice. She clicked her tongue once. Then she told me she knew someone, a woman who did this kind of thing, her words, and who was reliable, reasonably priced, and, Donna added with a firmness I didn't fully understand at the time, not someone who will take advantage of a person in a vulnerable moment. I nodded. I would have agreed to anything. She wrote a name and number on the back of a takeout menu she found on my counter without asking, handed it to me like a prescription, and left. I looked at the name. Remi Torres, Handywoman, licensed and insured. Below it, a phone number written in Donna's looping, decisive handwriting. I set the menu on the kitchen table and went back to deal with the bathroom. It took me another hour, 3 more towels, and a very patient customer service representative from the building's emergency maintenance line to get the water to stop. By the time I got into bed, everything smelled like damp and defeat. I stared at the ceiling. My ceiling, structurally intact, thank God, and thought about how I used to fall asleep next to someone, how the silence used to be full, how it had somehow gotten so much louder since she left. The next morning, I called the number. I was expecting voicemail. I had prepared a very normal, very casual message in my head that in no way revealed the chaos of the previous evening. Remi picked up on the second ring. Her voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that suggests the person behind it has never once sent a panicked text at midnight. She asked me to describe the problem. I described the problem. There was a brief pause, and then she said she could come by Thursday. Just like that. Thursday. Like it was easy. Like things could just be scheduled and handled. I said Thursday was great. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, holding the phone, aware that something had just shifted, though I couldn't have told you what or why. Thursday was 2 days away. I spent those 2 days doing something I hadn't done in months. Cleaning. Not the anxious surface cleaning I'd been doing since the breakup, the kind where you wipe the counter 3 times but never actually move anything. Real cleaning. I moved the couch. I organized the cabinet under the sink. The aftermath of my hardware store shopping spree. A graveyard of good intentions. I put the decorative towels back on the rack. I told myself it was because someone was coming over professionally and it would be embarrassing to have a mess. I told myself that very convincingly. I almost believed it. Thursday arrived the way significant days sometimes do. Ordinary on the surface, carrying weight underneath. I had coffee. I checked the bathroom ceiling 3 times. I told myself to stop checking the bathroom ceiling. At exactly 9 a.m, the buzzer rang. I pressed the intercom button and said hello, and a voice came back. That same unhurried, grounded voice, saying, "It's Remi." 2 words. And something in my chest did a thing I wasn't prepared for. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a small, quiet thing. Like a door somewhere deep inside me had opened just a crack, letting in light it hadn't seen in a very long time. I buzzed her in, stepped back from the door, and took a breath. My apartment was broken. I was a little broken too, and I had absolutely no idea that the woman coming up those stairs was about to fix a lot more than my pipes. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously, drop a comment telling me, have you ever tried to fix something after a heartbreak and made it so much worse? Because I really need to know I'm not the only one who climbed on a sink in socks at midnight. Subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 2, because Remi shows up, and trust me, she is not what I expected. I had a very specific image in my head of what a handywoman would look like. I'm not proud of this. I'm aware that expectations built entirely from television and zero real-world experience are not reliable. But I had pictured someone older, sturdier. Maybe with a no-nonsense ponytail and the general energy of a person who has seen everything and is impressed by none of it. I had pictured someone who would walk in, assess the damage, sigh in a way that communicated mild professional disappointment, and get to work. I had not pictured Remi Torres. She was 29, I would find out later. She looked younger, and somehow also ageless. The kind of person whose face doesn't give you easy information. She was wearing a worn gray Henley, dark jeans with a paint stain on the left knee, and work boots that had clearly logged some serious hours. Her hair was dark and pulled back, not in the no-nonsense ponytail I'd imagined, but loosely, like she'd done it in 30 seconds without a mirror and it had cooperated anyway. She carried a red metal toolbox in one hand and a travel mug in the other, and she looked at me the way someone looks at a door they're about to walk through, calmly, directly, without ceremony. She said good morning. I said good morning back, and immediately stepped aside too fast and nearly knocked over the coat rack by the door. She didn't comment on that. She stepped inside, set the toolbox down with the careful precision of someone who respects their tools, and looked around the apartment with that same unhurried attention she seemed to apply to everything. Not nosy, not detached, just present. Like she was actually seeing the place rather than just scanning it. I don't know why that made me nervous. It did. I gave her the tour, which is a generous way to describe what I did. I walked her to the bathroom, pointed at the ceiling, and said, with the confidence of someone who understood absolutely nothing about what had happened, "So, the pipe did a thing." She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the pipe. She crouched down and looked at the cabinet under the sink, which I had organized 2 days ago and was now very glad about. She asked 3 questions, Precise, practical questions that I answered to the best of my limited ability. Then she nodded once, the way people nod when they already know what needs to happen and are just confirming their own assessment. She told me what the problem was. I understood about 40% of the words she used, but I nodded throughout with the expression of someone following along perfectly. Then she told me what fixing it would cost, and I did the mental math fast enough to know it was more than I had budgeted for in a month, where I was also paying rent alone for the first time in 4 years. I must have made a face, because she paused and looked at me, not with pity, which I would have hated, but with the neutral consideration of someone running calculations. She said she could break it into 2 visits, fix the urgent issue today, come back in 2 weeks for the rest. It would spread the cost. I said that worked. She nodded again and got to work. I had planned to go to the living room and give her space. That was the professional thing to do. Instead, I leaned against the bathroom doorframe for a while, watching her work, because there is something genuinely arresting about watching someone do something they are completely, effortlessly competent at. She moved without hesitation. She didn't second-guess herself or consult anything or mutter under her breath. She just knew what to do and did it. I found this fascinating in the way that you find fascinating the things you most lack. I hadn't known what to do about anything in 43 days. We didn't talk much during that first visit. She wasn't unfriendly. She answered when I said something, smiled once when I made a self-deprecating comment about my hardware store purchases. A real smile, quick and a little crooked. But she didn't fill silence the way I do, which is compulsively and with whatever comes to mind first. She seemed comfortable and quiet. I was not, but I was learning to respect it. At one point she asked if I'd lived here long. I said 3 years. She said it was a good building, solid bones. I looked around at the apartment I'd shared with Claire and thought about how strange it is that a place can have good bones and still feel like it's falling apart. She finished the first repair in under 2 hours. She walked me through what she'd done, not condescendingly, but thoroughly, the way a person explains something when they actually want you to understand it. Then she wrote up a simple invoice, paper, handwritten, which I found unexpectedly charming in an era where everything is an app. She said she'd text me before coming back in 2 weeks for the rest. I said great. She picked up her toolbox and her long empty travel mug and headed for the door. I followed, because apparently that's what I do. I trail after people who seem to know where they're going. At the door she paused and looked back at the apartment one more time, the way she'd looked at it when she first arrived. Then she looked at me. Not for long. Just a moment. "You've got good instincts," she said. "The temporary fix you tried, it was the wrong tool, but the right idea." I blinked. I had not expected that. I had expected, if anything, gentle professional mockery. She gave me a small nod and left. I stood in my open doorway listening to her footsteps on the stairs and thinking about the last time someone had told me I had good instincts about anything. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway of my apartment, quieter now, and smelling faintly of something metallic and clean. And I did a very deliberate internal accounting of what I was feeling. Gratitude. Relief. The specific comfort of having a problem handled competently. Those were the acceptable answers. I acknowledged those and moved on. I did not, I told myself very firmly, think about the crooked smile. I made coffee. I sat down. I lasted about 4 minutes before I thought about the crooked smile. The second visit was supposed to be the last one. That was the agreement. 2 visits, 2 payments, problem solved, life resumed. Remi came back on a Saturday morning, fixed the remaining bathroom issue in 90 minutes, and then walked through the rest of the apartment the way she had that first day, with that calm, assessing attention that I was already recognizing as distinctly hers. She stopped in the hallway. She looked at the electrical outlet by the bedroom door. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said very evenly, This outlet is a fire hazard. I looked at the outlet. It looked like an outlet to me. She looked at me with the patience of someone who understood that not everyone can see what she sees. Do you want me to add it to the list? There was apparently a list now. I said yes. The list grew. Not because Remi was inventing problems. I want to be clear about that, because I've since had people suggest it, Donna included. With a knowing smile, I chose to ignore. The apartment was genuinely, enthusiastically falling apart. After the outlet came a kitchen faucet that had developed an opinion about water pressure. After the faucet came a section of baseboard heating that had stopped heating. After the heating came a bathroom exhaust fan that sounded, Remi said with her first unprompted joke, like it was running a marathon it never signed up for. I laughed longer than the joke probably warranted. She looked pleased in the understated way she looked pleased about things, a slight softening around the eyes, nothing dramatic. I was already learning to read her in small increments. By the fourth visit, I had stopped pretending I wasn't looking forward to it. This felt like an important admission to make to myself, even if I made it quietly and then immediately changed the subject in my own head. The apartment had become a different place on the mornings Remi was coming. I made better coffee. I opened the blinds. I put on something that wasn't the oversized sweatshirt I'd been living in since the breakup. Not for any reason. Just because it seemed like the appropriate thing to do when someone was coming over. These were not signs of anything, I told myself. These were signs of basic human functioning. I was simply relearning how to be a person. Remi was incidental. She was not incidental. She was the opposite of incidental. But I wasn't ready to use that word yet, so I didn't. What I did instead was talk to her, more each time. The conversations had evolved from purely logistical, what's broken, what does it cost, when can you come back, to something harder to categorize. She asked questions that were simple on the surface, and somehow not simple at all. What did I do for work? Whether I liked this neighborhood or just lived in it. What I thought about when I couldn't sleep. That last one surprised me. I told her I thought about things I should have said differently. She nodded slowly, like that was an answer she understood from the inside. I didn't ask her to elaborate. Some things you recognize without needing them explained. It was during the 5th visit that I found out about Salinas. She mentioned it sideways, the way she mentioned most personal things, attached to something else, not as the main point. She was fixing the baseboard heating, and I was sitting on the hallway floor with my back against the wall, which had somehow become my default position during her visits, and she said something about how winters here were nothing compared to where she grew up. I asked where that was. She said a small town outside Salinas, California. She said it the way people say the name of a place they've made peace with not going back to. I asked if she missed it. She thought about it for longer than most people would. Then she said she missed the smell of it. Dry grass and ocean at the same time. Which sounds like it shouldn't work, but does. She didn't say she missed the people. I noticed that. She had built everything herself, I was learning. The business, the client list, the reputation that had made Donna trust her enough to pass her number to a neighbor in crisis. She'd come to Portland 4 years ago with a truck, a toolbox, and what she described without drama as not a lot else. She didn't frame this as a hard luck story. She stated it the way she stated most things, as fact, neutral, already processed. I found myself thinking about the version of Remi who had arrived in a new city at 25, with almost nothing, and had quietly, methodically built a life from scratch. I found myself thinking she was one of the most resilient people I had ever met. I found myself thinking a lot of things I kept filing under observations, and not feelings. The moment that broke the filing system was minor, objectively. Unreportable, almost. We were in the kitchen. She was finishing up with the faucet, and I was attempting to be helpful by handing her tools when she asked for them, a role I was performing with great enthusiasm and moderate competence. She asked for the adjustable wrench. I handed her something. She looked at it. She looked at me. "That's a bottle opener," she said. I stared at it. I had picked it up from the counter with complete confidence. There was a pause, and then we both laughed. Real laughing. The kind that catches you off guard and doesn't stop immediately. Her laugh was lower than I expected. I handed her the actual wrench. Our fingers overlapped for less than a second. I became very interested in a spot on the kitchen wall. After she left that day, I called my friend Priya, who lives in Chicago and has the particular gift of being right about everything while making you feel like you arrived at the conclusion yourself. I told her I was just calling to catch up. Priya said, "Uh-huh." I talked about work for 3 minutes, and then somehow found myself describing Remi, the toolbox, the Selena's thing, the laugh, the wrench situation. There was a silence on Priya's end that was extremely loud. She said, "Sophie." I said, "Don't." She said, "I'm just saying her name." I said I had to go. I did not have to go. I lay on the couch after I hung up and stared at the ceiling, repaired, solid, no longer threatening to rain on me, and had an honest conversation with myself. The kind you have when you've been avoiding something long enough that it starts taking up more energy to avoid than to face. I liked Remi, not professionally, not just as a person in the abstract. I liked the way she moved through space, and the way she thought before she spoke, and the way she'd told me my instincts were good when she had no reason to say it, except that she meant it. I liked the crooked smile, and the low laugh, and the fact that she called the exhaust fan dramatic, like it had feelings. I liked her. That was the fact. The fact terrified me. It had been 58 days since Claire, and I was apparently doing this. I gave myself exactly one evening to sit with the terror. Then I made dinner, watched something forgettable on TV, and went to bed. The 6th visit was in 4 days. The kitchen light had started flickering, which Remi would need to look at. That was the relevant information. Everything else could wait. Everything else could wait indefinitely, in fact. In a very organized mental cabinet labeled "Not Now," right next to the drawer I still hadn't opened that was full of things Claire had left behind. The apartment was almost fixed. I was considerably less fixed. But 4 days from now, Remi would ring the buzzer, and something in my chest would do that thing again, and I would stand at the door and breathe and let her in. That much, at least, I knew how to do. Donna appeared on the 6th visit like she had been waiting behind her door with a plate of cookies and a strategy, which, I would later conclude, she had been. Remi had been in the apartment for maybe 20 minutes, working on the flickering kitchen light, when there was a knock. Not Donna's usual complaint knock, but a softer, neighborly knock, the kind that says I come in peace and also with baked goods. I opened the door. Donna stood there in a floral blouse, holding a plate of snickerdoodles covered in plastic wrap, wearing an expression of complete and unconvincing innocence. She said she'd made too many and thought I might want some. I looked at the cookies. I looked at her. I took the cookies. She stepped inside before I could decide whether to invite her. This was consistent with her character. She looked at the kitchen, where Remi was on a step stool examining the light fixture, and said, "Oh, Remi, I didn't know you'd be here," with the conviction of someone who absolutely knew. Remi glanced over her shoulder and smiled. Not the small professional smile I usually got, but something warmer and more familiar. They knew each other, I realized. Of course they did. Donna had recommended her. I had somehow not fully processed that this meant they had a pre-existing relationship, and that Donna therefore had a source of information about my life that operated independently of me. I found this mildly alarming. The three of us existed in the kitchen together for the next 40 minutes in a dynamic I can only describe as being observed by someone who wasn't pretending hard enough not to be observing. Donna sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. She had also brought her own coffee, which told me everything about how spontaneous this visit was, and talked. She was good at talking. She asked Remi about a job she'd done in the Pearl District, whether the clients had been difficult. She asked me about work, about whether I'd been sleeping, about whether I'd called my mother recently. She did this lightly, conversationally, the way you maintain the appearance of randomness when you're actually collecting data. I've since decided Donna missed her calling as an intelligence analyst. At one point, Remi said something technical about the wiring in the fixture, and I asked a question that revealed I had been paying attention to things she'd explained on previous visits. It was a small thing. Remi looked at me with a brief expression I couldn't fully read, something between surprised and pleased, and answered the question directly, like I was someone worth answering carefully. I looked back at my coffee. When I glanced up, Donna was watching me with the stillness of a person trying very hard not to smile. I gave her a look. She gave me cookies. This was, I was learning, her primary diplomatic tool. After Remi finished and packed up and said goodbye to both of us with the easy warmth of someone comfortable in their own skin. And after the door closed behind her, the kitchen went quiet. Donna sipped her coffee. I sipped mine. The silence had texture. It was the silence of someone waiting for you to say something so they don't have to. I was not going to give her the satisfaction. I lasted approximately 45 seconds. "Don't," I said. Donna looked at me with her eyebrows raised, the picture of innocence. "I didn't say anything," she said. "You were about to," I said. She set down her mug. She folded her hands on the table. This was, I was learning, her version of clearing her throat before a prepared statement. She didn't say what I expected her to say. I expected teasing, something light, something I could deflect with humor. Instead, she said, quietly and without any performance, "You smile differently when she's here, Sophie." Just that. 8 words, delivered without drama. I opened my mouth to say something dismissive, and found I didn't have anything. The deflection I'd prepared required her to be less sincere than she was being, and Donna, whatever her methods, was being completely sincere. I closed my mouth. I looked at the plate of snickerdoodles. I thought about the flickering light, and how Remi had fixed it in under an hour, and how she'd answered my question like it was worth answering. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said finally. Donna nodded, the way people nod when they're giving you permission to lie for now. She left shortly after, with the empty plate and the satisfied air of someone who had accomplished exactly what they came to do. I stood in my kitchen, brighter now, the light steady and cooperative, and did not think about what she'd said. I did this for about 6 minutes, which was how long it took me to do the dishes, and then I stopped not thinking about it and thought about it directly. Did I smile differently? I ran a quick internal survey. The evidence was inconclusive. Or rather, the evidence was conclusive, and I didn't like what it concluded, which is a different thing entirely. I texted Priya. I said, "Donna noticed." Priya responded in 4 seconds with, "Of course she did." Then, "Sophie." Then, "Sophie." I put the phone face down on the counter. Then I picked it back up because I'm not strong. Priya had added, "Just so we're clear, a 62-year-old woman with cookies figured out what you've been pretending not to know for 3 weeks. I typed back, "She's very perceptive." Priya sent back a string of emojis that I will not reproduce here, but that communicated her feelings with impressive efficiency. I turned the phone back over. The kitchen light stayed on, steady and warm. I stood under it for a moment. It was a good light. Remi had fixed it well. That night, I sat with the thing I'd been avoiding with the focused energy of someone who had run out of places to put it. I was not, I told myself, going to act on anything. I was 58 days, 61 now, out of a 4-year relationship. I was not in a state to trust my own instincts about another person. I was lonely and recently heartbroken, and Remi was competent and kind, and showed up reliably, which were, I was aware, not sufficient reasons to feel the way I was feeling. These were all reasonable thoughts. I had them in a very orderly sequence. And then I thought about the way Remi had answered my question, like I was worth answering carefully. And the order collapsed a little at the edges, the way it does when a reasonable thought meets an unreasonable feeling, and neither one is willing to leave. I didn't resolve anything that night. I made tea. I read 40 pages of a novel I've since forgotten. And I went to bed. Before I turned out the light, I looked at the ceiling. My solid, repaired, non-dripping ceiling, and thought about the fact that before Remi, every broken thing in this apartment had made me feel more alone. And now each fixed thing felt like something else. Something I didn't have a clean word for yet. Not hope, exactly. Or maybe hope, exactly. I turned out the light. Down the hall, I could hear the faint sound of Donna's television through the wall. Some late-night program, a laugh track rising and falling. I thought, she brought snickerdoodles. She planned the whole thing. And I ate every single one of them. Claire's text arrived on a Wednesday morning at 8:14 a.m., which felt deliberate. Claire was a deliberate person. She did not send messages at 8:14 a.m. by accident. She sent them at 8:14 a.m. because it was after breakfast and before the workday fully began, and it was, therefore, a reasonable hour at which to detonate something. I was on my second cup of coffee, standing at the kitchen window watching a guy across the street argue with a parking meter, when my phone lit up on the counter. I saw her name. I put the cup down. I read the message. I read it again. I turned the phone face down, picked it back up, and read it a third time, which did not make it say anything different. It said, "I've been thinking about us a lot lately. I think I made a mistake. Would you be willing to talk?" 30 words. I counted them. Then I counted them again, which is something I do when I'm stalling. 30 words after 4 years and 68 days of silence, delivered at 8:14 a.m. on a Wednesday, like a bill arriving in the mail. Unexpected, unwelcome, and impossible to just throw away without opening. I set the phone on the counter with the deliberateness of someone handling something fragile. Then I went and stood in the living room for a while, which is where I go when I don't know what to do with my body. The thing about Claire is that for a long time, she was the answer to most questions I had about my life. Where are we going for the holidays? Claire knew. What do we do about the lease? Claire had a plan. What happens if this gets hard? Claire had thoughts on that too. Organized thoughts, presented with confidence, which I had confused for some time with certainty. What I had learned at the end was that confident and certain are not the same thing. Claire had been very confident that she needed something different. She had not been certain enough about it to say so before 4 years had passed. That distinction had cost us both something. I had spent 68 days figuring out what it had cost me specifically. I did not respond, not immediately. I put on shoes, which I sometimes do when I need to think, and walked around the block twice in the October cold with my hands in my pockets, having a conversation in my head with myself that was not particularly flattering to either side of my internal argument. One part of me, the part that still had a drawer of Claire's things, and remembered exactly how it felt to have the silence be full, wanted to type back yes. Let's talk before I'd finished the second lap. The other part, quieter and more recently arrived, asked me what I was actually hoping that conversation would give me. I didn't have a clean answer. I came back inside. I did not respond. Remi was coming that afternoon. 7th visit. The flickering light in the hallway this time, and something going on with a kitchen cabinet hinge that had been bothering me for weeks. I had texted her about it Monday, and she'd confirmed Thursday, then moved it to Wednesday when a job canceled. I know the details of her schedule the way you know the details of things you're paying more attention to than you're admitting. She arrived at 2 o'clock with the red toolbox and a different travel mug, this one dark green and dented in a way that suggested history. She said hello. She looked at me for exactly 1 second longer than usual. "You okay?" she said. Not as small talk, as a real question. I said I was fine. She nodded, not entirely convinced, and got to work. I sat on the hallway floor in my usual spot with my back against the wall and watched her work on the light fixture and tried very hard to be a normal person having a normal afternoon. I was not entirely successful. I was quieter than usual, which Remi noticed without commenting on it, and I kept picking up my phone and putting it back down without looking at it, which she also noticed. At some point she asked, without looking away from what she was doing, whether I wanted to talk about it. The casualness of the offer was what got me. Not "are you okay again?" Not "what's wrong?" Just a door left open, no pressure attached. I looked at the ceiling. I said my ex had texted. I said she wanted to talk. I said I didn't know what to do with that. Remi was quiet for a moment. The hallway was quiet. Then she said, "What does she want to talk about?" I said I thought she wanted to try again. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. Remi's silences never were. Then she said, "What do you want?" And there it was. 4 words, simple and direct. The question I'd been circling all morning without landing on. I opened my mouth and closed it. I looked at my hands. I thought about Claire at 8:14 a.m. and the drawer of things and 4 years of a system that worked until it didn't. I thought about the parking meter guy and whether he ever won. I said honestly, "I don't know yet." Remi nodded. She didn't push. She went back to the fixture. That was, I realized, exactly the right response. She stayed longer than the job required. Not inappropriately. She found the cabinet hinge issue and fixed that too, and then noticed a draft coming from the window seal in the living room and spent 20 minutes on that as well. But when the work was done, she didn't leave immediately. We ended up in the kitchen. I made coffee. She sat at the table. First time she'd actually sat down in my apartment, I realized, rather than crouching by something or standing on a step stool. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out the window at the street below. I sat across from her. We talked about nothing urgent. She mentioned a difficult client she'd had that week, someone who kept changing the scope of the job. I mentioned a deadline at work I'd been avoiding. The conversation was easy in the way that conversations are easy when the other person isn't performing anything. At some point, she told me about leaving Salinas. Not the surface version she'd mentioned before, the truck, the toolbox, the fresh start, but something closer to the center of it. She'd been in a relationship there, someone she'd thought was permanent. It hadn't been. She said she'd stayed too long after she already knew it wasn't right, because leaving felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She said it in her characteristic way, factual, already digested. But I heard the thing underneath it, the part that was still true even after being processed. I thought about 30 words at 8:14 a.m. I thought about staying too long in things because leaving felt like a verdict. I didn't say any of that, but I think she knew I was thinking it. She left at 5:30. At the door, she paused in the way she sometimes did, like she was deciding something. Then she said, "For what it's worth, the answer to what do you want doesn't have to come from what you had before." She said it simply, without weight, and then she was gone. I stood at the closed door for a long moment. The hallway light was fixed, steady and even above me. I went to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and looked at Claire's message one more time. 30 words. I put the phone in the drawer, the other drawer, not Claire's drawer, and made dinner. I did not respond that night. I did not respond the night after. I was beginning, slowly and with considerable resistance, to understand what I actually wanted. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The apartment was almost done. Remi told me this on the 8th visit, standing in the living room with her checklist, an actual paper checklist, because she was that kind of person, running her pen down the items with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finishes what they start. She said there were 2 things left: the window seal in the bedroom and a section of the bathroom tile that had been bothering her since the first visit. a hairline crack she'd been monitoring and had decided now needed to be addressed properly. 2 things. After that, she said, the apartment would be in good shape. She said it neutrally, professionally, the way you deliver information that is objectively good news. I said great. I smiled. The smile took some effort I hope wasn't visible. I had been aware for about a week that the visits were ending. This awareness had settled into my chest with the specific weight of something you can see coming and cannot stop. I had not told anyone this. Not Priya, not Donna, certainly not myself in any direct way. What I had done instead was become irrationally invested in the apartment finding new problems. I had examined every outlet, every hinge, every inch of grout with the hopeful attention of someone looking for reasons. The apartment, newly repaired and apparently satisfied with itself, had offered nothing. It had decided, after weeks of dramatic malfunction, to be completely fine. I found this deeply unhelpful and a little personally offensive. Remi started with the windowsill. The bedroom was small, and the work required her to be close to the window, which meant I was either in the doorway or in the room. And being in the room felt more honest than hovering at the threshold like I was afraid of something. I sat on the edge of the bed. My bed, just to be clear. Ordinary and unmade because I'd forgotten she was coming until 20 minutes before, and watched her work the way I'd been watching her work for weeks now. She was in a dark blue Henley this time, sleeves pushed up, and she moved with the same unhurried precision she always did, deliberate and calm. I had memorized this without meaning to. That's what happens when you pay attention to something long enough. It stops being observation and starts being knowledge. We talked while she worked. Easy conversation, the kind we'd gotten good at. Overlapping stories. Unfinished thoughts that the other person somehow finished anyway. She told me about a job she'd seen in a Victorian house in northwest Portland. Original hardwood floors and plaster walls. The kind of place that required patience she clearly had. I told her about a project at work that had finally come together after 3 weeks of being convinced it wouldn't. She asked what the project was. I explained it. She asked a follow-up question that proved she had actually listened to the explanation. I looked at her for a moment too long. She was looking at the window seal. I looked at the wall. The tile work was in the bathroom. This is relevant because my bathroom is not large. This is a fact I had never particularly considered before, because it had never before been occupied by both me and Remi Torres at the same time while I was already in a state of heightened awareness of everything she did. She was working on the section near the floor, which required her to crouch, and I was leaning against the vanity because there was nowhere else to be. And the room was the size of a generous closet, and at some point she stood up to check something on the wall and we were close. Not dramatically close. Just close. The kind of close that happens in small spaces and requires no intention from either party. She was looking at the wall. I was looking at approximately the same wall. Then she turned her head slightly to say something about the tile adhesive, and I turned at the same time and we were looking directly at each other from a distance that had no professional justification. The sentence she'd been forming didn't finish. I don't know what my face was doing. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop it. The moment lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough to be a moment. Long enough for both of us to know it was a moment. I felt the air in the room change the way air changes before weather. A shift in pressure. A kind of charged stillness. Neither of us moved toward or away. We just stayed in it, for those 3 or 4 seconds. Like we were both waiting for the other one to decide what it meant. I looked away first. I'm not proud of this, but I'm not surprised by it either. I looked away and said something. I genuinely cannot tell you what. Something about the tile. Something practical and completely unnecessary. And the moment dissolved. Remi turned back to the wall. Her voice, when she answered, was even. I could not tell from her voice what had just happened for her. This was both reassuring and maddening. I gripped the edge of the vanity and breathed and told myself to be a normal person, a task I was performing with declining success. She finished the tile. She cleaned up. She packed the toolbox with the same careful efficiency she always packed it, each tool returned to its place. I walked her to the door. We did the usual routine. She'd send the final invoice. I'd transfer the payment. Everything settled. Adult, professional, clean. She picked up her jacket from the hook by the door, the olive green one she'd arrived in, and then stopped. Looked at the hook, looked at me. "I'll get the rest next time," she said, meaning the jacket she'd apparently decided to leave, though the next time was also the last time. And I think we both understood that leaving the jacket was a way of saying something neither of us was ready to say directly. I said sure. She left. I stood with my back against the closed door for a long time. The apartment was quiet and fixed, and smelling faintly of tile adhesive and the cedar from her jacket still hanging on my hook. I put my hand on the jacket, just rested it there for a moment. Then I walked to the kitchen and called Priya, who picked up immediately like she'd been waiting, which she probably had been. I said, "Something almost happened." Priya said, "I know." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because you called me." I sat down on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and stared at the light fixture Remi had fixed on the 6th visit. Steady. Warm. Dependable. "I don't know what to do," I said. Priya said, gently but without hesitation, "Yes, you do." She was right. I did know. I had known for a while in the quiet way you know things before you're ready to act on them. But knowing and doing are separated by a distance that feels small from the outside and enormous from the inside. And I was still standing on my side of it, looking at the olive green jacket on the hook, and the fixed light overhead, and the apartment that had been broken, and was now, almost entirely, whole. The last visit was in 5 days. 2 things left on the list, but only one of them was about the apartment. Claire showed up on a Friday. Remi was coming on Saturday. I want to be clear that I did not arrange this. The universe did. With the specific cruelty of something that has a sense of narrative and no regard for the person living inside it. Claire texted Thursday evening to ask if she could come by. Not to talk on the phone, not to meet somewhere neutral. To come by. To the apartment. Our apartment for 4 years, before it became just mine and started falling apart in ways that turned out to matter. I said yes. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because saying no felt like a door I wasn't ready to close permanently. Maybe because I needed to see her to understand what I was actually feeling. Maybe I was just tired of the 30 words sitting unanswered in my phone like a question I'd been ignoring on an exam. She looked the same. This was my first thought when I opened the door. She looks exactly the same. And somehow that was more disorienting than if she'd looked different. Same dark coat, same careful posture, same way of standing in a doorway like she was waiting for permission she expected to receive. I stepped back. She came in. She looked around the apartment with an expression I recognized. Not quite nostalgia, more like inventory, the way you look at a place you used to know the dimensions of. I watched her notice the things that were different. The furniture rearranged slightly. The new light in the hallway. The kitchen faucet that no longer had opinions about water pressure. She didn't comment on any of it. She sat down on the couch. I sat in the chair across from it. We had, without discussing it, arranged ourselves as people having a conversation rather than people who used to share a bed. I was grateful for that. She said she'd been thinking about what went wrong between us. She said it carefully, the way Claire said most things, organized, considered, building toward a point. She said she thought she'd made the decision to leave from a place of fear rather than clarity, and that she'd been processing that with her therapist, and that what she'd arrived at, after 3 months, was that she had made a mistake. She said this looking at me directly, which was both brave and hard to receive. I listened. I let her finish. And I noticed, while she was talking, something I hadn't expected to notice. I was not undone by it. A version of me, 60 or 70 days ago, would have come apart at the seams hearing those words. This version of me sat in the chair and listened, and felt something more complicated than relief. Something that had the texture of understanding without the heat of wanting. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I meant that. Then I told her, as honestly as I could manage, that I didn't think getting back together was the right thing. I watched her face receive this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if there was someone else. The question was fair. I thought about the olive green jacket on the hook by the door, which Claire could not see from where she was sitting. I said not exactly, which was true in the technical sense, and not particularly true in any other sense. Claire nodded slowly. She was not a person who fell apart in front of other people. We had that in common. But I could see, in the careful way she was holding herself, that this was costing her something. That cost me something too. Caring about a person doesn't expire cleanly just because the relationship does. We talked for another hour. Not about getting back together. That door had closed, and we both knew it. And there's a particular relief in mutual understanding that doesn't require anyone to be the villain. We talked about the 4 years, what had worked and what hadn't. The places where we'd been good for each other, and the places where we'd quietly stopped being honest about what we needed. It was the most direct conversation we'd had in probably a year, which told me something about why it had ended that I hadn't fully seen from inside it. She cried a little, briefly, in the controlled way she cried. I handed her the box of tissues from the side table. She took 2 and recomposed herself in under a minute. I always admired that about her. I also always knew that what I needed was someone who didn't need to recompose quite so fast. She left at 8 o'clock. We hugged at the door. A real hug, long enough to mean something, brief enough to mean goodbye. I watched her walk down the hallway toward the elevator and thought about 4 years, and the system, and the drawer of her things I still hadn't cleared out. When she disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and stood in the entryway and did a complete internal scan, the kind you do when you want an honest read on your own condition. I was sad. Genuinely, cleanly sad. The way you're sad when something is over and you've finally stopped pretending it isn't. But underneath the sad was something else. A steadiness. A sense of standing on ground that was mine. I hadn't felt that in 4 years, maybe longer. I did not sleep well. I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and let the evening settle through me in layers. Claire's face, the 4 years, the honest conversation, the hug at the door. I let myself feel all of it without trying to organize it or resolve it. Then at some point in the middle of the night I thought about tomorrow, and Remi, and the last 2 items on the paper checklist, and the olive green jacket, and what Priya had said, "Yes, you do." And the sad and the steadiness rearranged themselves into something that resembled a decision. I didn't act on it at 2 a.m. I was not going to be that person. But I held it, quietly, like something I didn't want to put down. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of November morning that makes Portland look like a painting of itself. I made coffee. I looked at the jacket on the hook. I was ready. At 9, the buzzer rang and I pressed the intercom and said hello, and Remi's voice came back through the speaker. Low, unhurried. "It's Remi." And my chest did the thing it had been doing since the very first time, except this time I didn't file it under observations. I buzzed her in. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. A slight adjustment, careful and attentive, the way she looked at things she was trying to understand. She was carrying the red toolbox in one hand and her olive green jacket in the other. She hadn't left it again. She'd brought it back, which meant last time had been a choice, and today was also a choice. And I was thinking about what that meant when she stepped inside and I stepped back, and the morning came in with her, cold and gray and full of something I was done pretending not to feel. She set the toolbox down. She hung the jacket on the hook. She looked at me again, steadily, without the professional distance she'd maintained so carefully for weeks. "Last one," she said. Her voice was even, but her eyes were asking something. I said, "Let's get started." But we both understood, I think, that I was not talking about the tiles. She finished the last 2 items in an hour and 40 minutes. I know this because I was aware of every minute of it, in the specific way you're aware of time when you know it's running out. She did the bathroom tile first, the hairline crack, sealed and smoothed, and made invisible with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. Then the bedroom window seal, which she'd been right about from the beginning, a draft I'd stopped noticing because I'd gotten used to the cold. She fixed it, and I stood in the bedroom doorway and felt the difference immediately. The air in the room settling, the chill disappearing, the space becoming warmer in a way that was practical, and also, given everything, felt like more than that. Remi ran her hand along the sealed edge, checking her own work. Satisfied. She always looked quietly satisfied when something was done right. We moved through the apartment together one last time, which she framed as a final walkthrough, professional and thorough, checking each repaired thing, making sure everything held. The bathroom ceiling, the electrical outlet, the faucet, the heating, the hallway light, the kitchen cabinet, the window seals, the tile, every broken thing, fixed. She moved through the rooms without ceremony, and I followed. And what I felt was something I hadn't anticipated: pride. Not in her work, though her work was excellent. Pride in the apartment, my apartment, the place I'd been alone in and frightened of and hadn't known how to manage, and that now, after weeks of Remi and her red toolbox and her paper checklist, felt genuinely like mine, like something I was capable of taking care of. She had fixed the apartment. She had also, without ever saying so directly, fixed something in the way I thought about myself. In the kitchen, she wrote up the final invoice. Paper, handwritten, same as always. I had come to love this about her, the deliberate analog quality of it in a world that wanted everything digitized and instant. She slid it across the table. I looked at it. I looked at her. She was standing on the other side of the table with her hands in her jacket pockets. She'd put the olive green jacket back on, which meant she was almost ready to go, and I was almost out of time, and I had a decision to make. I had made the decision at 2 a.m. on Friday, and I had not unmade it in the daylight hours of Saturday morning, which meant it was still the decision. I took a breath. I paid the invoice on my phone. Then I set the phone down and said her name. She looked up. I had rehearsed something, a careful, articulate thing that acknowledged the professional context and respected the ambiguity of whatever had been building between us, and left her room to respond however she needed to respond. I had rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror at 7 that morning while the coffee was brewing. What I actually said was, "I don't want this to be the last time you come here, not for the apartment." I said it looking directly at her, because I had decided that whatever happened next, I was going to be the kind of person who looked directly at things. There was a silence. Not Remi's usual comfortable silence. A different kind. Charged and still. The 3-second kind from the bathroom last week. Except this time neither of us looked away. She said, "Sophie." Just my name. The way she said it. Low and careful. Like she'd been holding it. Told me everything before the next sentence arrived. She said, "I was going to find a reason to come back. I was trying to figure out what it was going to be." I stared at her. "The apartment's fixed," I said. "I know," she said. "I was going to figure something out. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out of me in a rush, relief, and disbelief, and something so much lighter than anything I'd felt in months. She smiled, the crooked smile, the one I had been not thinking about since the second visit. We were still standing on opposite sides of the kitchen table, and this suddenly seemed like an absurd amount of furniture to have between two people. I walked around the table. She didn't move away. I stopped in front of her, close. The kind of close that requires a decision to be close. And looked at her, and she looked at me, and the apartment was quiet and fixed and full of November light coming through the sealed windows. I thought about 43 days of surviving alone, and Claire's 30 words, and Donna's snickerdoodles, and Priya saying yes you do, and the olive green jacket on the hook, and all the small moments I had been filing under observations instead of feelings. And then I stopped thinking, and I put my hand on her arm, light and asking, and she leaned in and I leaned in, and we met somewhere in the middle, the way you meet someone when both of you have decided at the same time. The kiss was quiet. That's the only word I have for it that feels accurate. Quiet and completely certain, and over too soon, and also somehow exactly the right length. When we stepped back, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, and I watched her face, open and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen before, and thought, there she is. The person underneath the competence and the patience and the low voice and the crooked smile. There she is. She opened her eyes. She looked at me the way she looked at things she wanted to understand thoroughly. I looked back. Neither of us said anything for a moment, because nothing needed to be said immediately, and we were both, I think, people who understood that. Then she said, "The hallway light in the third-floor landing is flickering. I noticed it on the way up." I blinked. "That's not my light," I said. "No," she agreed. "But I know the building super. I could probably mention it." She was looking at me with that expression, the one that was doing several things at once. I understood that she was not talking about the light. I was getting better at understanding what she wasn't saying directly. "You should probably come back and check on it," I said. "Make sure it's handled correctly." She nodded, serious, almost but not quite hiding the smile. "Professional responsibility," she said. "Absolutely," I said. She stayed for coffee, not a quick cup at the counter. She sat at the kitchen table, jacket off, back on the hook, and I made coffee properly, with the good beans I'd been saving for no specific occasion that turned out to be this one. We sat across from each other and talked for 2 hours. About everything and nothing urgent. Her plans to eventually take on an apprentice. My vague idea of learning one practical skill before I turned 33. What we both thought about Portland winters. Whether Donna had been orchestrating everything from the beginning. We decided she had. We agreed she deserved credit. Remi said she was going to bring her cookies next time she saw her. I said Donna would accept nothing less. When she finally left, the afternoon had gone gray and soft, and the apartment was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the heating. I stood at the window and watched the street below. Different parking meter, different argument, and took a full accounting of where I was. 68 days ago, I had been standing on a sink in socks, holding a wrench I didn't understand, coming apart in a bathroom that was coming apart around me. Now the bathroom was fixed, and the outlet, and the faucet, and the heating, and the light, and the window seals, and the tile. Every broken thing, addressed. And I was still here. Not the version of me that had organized herself around another person's certainty, but a different version. One who had learned to call for help and sit on hallway floors and pay attention to things worth paying attention to. I was not fixed, exactly. Fixed implies you were wrong before. I was something better than fixed. I was mine. My phone buzzed on the counter. Remi. A text that said, "Next Saturday. I'll bring the good coffee." I read it twice. I smiled in the empty apartment, to no one but myself. the smile that Donna had apparently noticed 3 weeks before I did. I typed back, "I'll make sure something's broken." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Don't." I kind of like it when things work. I set the phone down and looked around the apartment, solid and warm and mine, and thought, yeah, me too. 6 months later, Remi's green jacket stopped being a visitor on my hook. It just stayed. I didn't make an announcement about it. Neither did she. It was there one morning, and it was there the next morning, and at some point I reorganized the hooks to give it a permanent spot, slightly to the left of mine, and that was that. That's how most things happened with us, not with declarations or dramatic turning points, but with small, deliberate acts that accumulated into something neither of us had to name out loud to understand. The jacket, the coffee mug she left in my cabinet, the drawer, her drawer, not Claire's drawer, which I had finally emptied in December with Priya on the phone, and a glass of wine, and considerably less difficulty than I'd expected. We told Donna first. Not intentionally. She found out the way Donna found out everything, which is to say she knocked on my door one Saturday morning in January with a container of soup she'd made because it was cold, and I lived alone, and Remi opened the door in my sweatshirt because I was in the shower, and Donna looked at her for exactly 1 second and then said, "I'll leave the soup on the counter, sweetheart," and walked directly back to her apartment. She texted me 45 minutes later. The text was a single word. Finally, Remi and I were laughing about it over breakfast when it arrived. We showed it to each other at the same time, each of us having received the same text, which meant Donna had both our numbers and had been waiting for the right moment to use that fact. We sent her flowers the next day. She sent back a text that said the arrangement was a little small, but she appreciated the gesture. Priya flew in from Chicago in March and made me take her to every place I'd mentioned in the months of phone calls: the hardware store, the block I'd walked twice in the October cold, the kitchen where I'd sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets and said I don't know what to do. She stood in that kitchen, looked around, nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose advice had been validated by time, and said, "I like what you've done with it." She meant the apartment. She also meant everything else. Priya has always been efficient with her words. We had dinner, the 3 of us, Priya and Remi talking about Portland versus Chicago, with the competitive civic pride of people who genuinely love where they live. Me watching them from across the table, feeling something so full, it was almost difficult to hold. Priya texted me after she left. "She's the real thing, Sophie. Don't mess it up." I texted back, "Working on it." She sent the emoji with the thumbs up. High praise from Priya. What I hadn't expected, what nobody tells you about falling in love with someone like Remi, is how much you learn about yourself from being with a person who shows up differently than you do. She is still unhurried where I am impulsive. She still thinks before she speaks where I speak to find out what I think. She still sits comfortably in silences that I have to actively resist filling. But here is what I have learned in 6 months. Silence shared with the right person is not empty. It is possibly the fullest thing there is. I have learned to let conversations breathe. I have learned that competence and tenderness are not opposing qualities, that someone can hand you a wrench with precision and care for you with the same hands. I have learned that the version of me who organized herself around someone else's certainty was not wrong to want closeness. She was just looking for it in a form that required her to disappear a little. I don't disappear with Remi. The apartment is still mine. That matters to me in a way I couldn't have articulated a year ago. Remi has a place of her own, 20 minutes away, which she keeps with the spare efficiency of someone who doesn't accumulate things they don't need. We have not moved in together, and we have not had an urgent conversation about when we will, because we are, both of us, people who understand that some things build at their own pace and are stronger for it. What we have is something that exists in both spaces. Her truck in my parking spot on weekends, my reading glasses on her nightstand, the easy geography of 2 lives that have chosen to overlap, without collapsing into each other. It is, I think, the healthiest thing I have ever done. I think it every time I see the green jacket on the hook. In April, she took on an apprentice, a 22-year-old named Jordan, who carries a new toolbox with the slightly self-conscious pride of someone who just bought their first professional tools. Remi is patient with Jordan in the same way she was patient with me in the beginning, answering questions thoroughly, never making the other person feel foolish for not already knowing. I watched her explain something to Jordan once, in the parking lot of a supply store, crouching down to demonstrate something with a part in her hand, and I thought about the first time she'd crouched under my bathroom sink, and I'd stood in the doorway pretending I wasn't watching. I've stopped pretending not to watch. It seems like a waste of good moments. I fixed something by myself last month. The towel bar in the bathroom had come loose from the wall, not dramatically, just enough to wobble. And Remi was in the middle of a big job across town, and I looked at it and thought, I can do this. I watched one YouTube tutorial, bought the correct anchor this time, used the correct tool, and fixed it. It took 25 minutes and one minor moment of doubt, and a vocabulary that remained entirely appropriate. I sent Remi a photo when it was done, the towel bar, straight and solid against the tile. She responded with, "Look at you." 3 words. I put the phone in my pocket and stood in the bathroom and felt the particular satisfaction of having done something myself, for my own home, with my own hands. Then I went and made coffee and waited for her to get back, because doing things yourself and wanting someone to come home to are not, it turns out, contradictions. They are just 2 different kinds of being whole. Some things I know now that I didn't know 14 months ago. A pipe can fail at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it is not a sign that everything is broken. Asking for help is not the same as being incapable. The difference between a person who is certain and a person who is confident is worth learning before you organize your life around someone else's version of it. Silence is not always absence. A crooked smile, noticed once, is not something you unnotice. And sometimes, not always, not by design, but sometimes, the thing you called for help about is the least important thing that gets fixed. Donna's birthday was last week. We brought her flowers, a bigger arrangement this time, and she made us sit down and have coffee and told us, with the authority of someone who has been paying attention to people for 62 years, that we were good for each other. She said it plainly, without performance, the way she'd said everything that had mattered. Remi said thank you and meant it. I said we had her to thank, partly. Donna waved this off in the way she waves off credit she very clearly feels she deserves. When we left her apartment and walked back down the hall, Remi took my hand. Easy and unhurried, like every other thing she did. We walked past my door and stopped, and I unlocked it and we went inside. The apartment was warm. The light in the hallway was steady. Everything held. I turned the key in the lock and thought, for the first time in a long time, that this, exactly this, was what I had been trying to find my way back to. Not a person to fix what was broken. A person to stand beside me while I learned how.